The Carolina Panthers are at a crossroads in their franchise's history. We have to grab another head coach in the David Tepper era because we got the last one wrong with Frank Reich. We fired him midway in the season, and now we have to find someone else. There's been a lot of questions regarding on who the next head coach of the Carolina Panthers should be. In my eyes, one of really two men that realistically could get the Carolina Panthers job that can save this franchise is Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. I think he truly can save the Carolina Panthers and be the long-term coach that we need. But we have to ask ourselves, how is this even possible? Why would Johnson, the most coveted aspiring head coach in the league, he's one of the most coveted young coaches in the league in general, want to come to Carolina over the Atlanta Falcons or the Los Angeles Chargers, the Washington Commanders, or now most recently, the Tennessee Titans? I mean, come on. We don't even have a first-round pick right now. I mean, that belongs to Chicago because of the Bryce Young trade. Our roster is horrendous. You have to listen to David Tepper in weekly meetings. I mean, that enough would do it for me. I mean, I wouldn't sign up for it. I mean, it can't get any worse. But let me tell you some things that the Panthers do have, because it's not all bad. Their defense is pretty solid. There's only a few holes on this defense that could get fixed in an offseason or two. I mean, they do have, on the offensive side of the ball, they do have former number 1 overall pick Bryce Young to be the quarterback of the future. They have a ton of cap space to build a team around, so whoever Johnson wanted, he could afford. And the Panthers have the base money to pay the $15 million a year contract that Johnson is expecting if he takes a head coaching job. This is where having David Tepper as an owner isn't too bad, because the Panthers in this situation, you have to think, not every team is going to want to pay a new head coach $15 million a year. This plays to the Panthers' strength, because remember when Tepper gave a $64 million contract to Matt Rule to make sure he came to Carolina over somewhere else? Who's to say he won't do that again with Ben Johnson? Johnson happens to be a Carolina native from Charleston, so maybe he just wants to be close to his family. Maybe he wants to come home. I mean, things are just looking better and better and better. Now, as for the Panthers, why do I think that Ben Johnson is the best option for the Panthers head coaching job? Well, I think it's pretty clear. Look at what he's done to Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions offense. I mean, he's completely revamped it. He has completely saved Jared Goff's career from going from being like kind of a bust to now a really solid and really respected quarterback. I mean, this offense is super dynamic. They can beat you with the pass. They can beat you with the run. I mean, they're just really, really good. The Panthers offense was arguably the worst in the NFL. We couldn't score for anything. We got shut out the last 2 times of the season. Bryce Young was not allowed to sling it. He made many errors. He had no offensive line. If we hired Ben Johnson, he could help develop Bryce Young into the player that he wanted him to be. He could call the plays, so it wouldn't really matter who the offensive coordinator was. So then we don't have bum Thomas Brown calling plays. He could help build a roster to help Bryce Young succeed, and that's key for the Panthers, to grab a head coach that will complement Bryce Young well. Bryce has major potential. People are already writing him off, but Bryce can still be the guy that we saw at Alabama. There's no doubt about it. But he has to have the team that will support him and that where he can succeed, and he has to have a go-to guy who he can go to. Tight end Hayden Hurst of the Panthers said that he believed that Bryce's problem was that he had too many voices in his ear taking leadership advice from. I mean, he had Frank Reich, he had Jim Caldwell, he had Thomas Brown, he had Josh McCown. There were so many guys constantly talking to Bryce, telling him to do different stuff. That has to mess with you mentally. I think that this guidance should come from a head coach, and Ben Johnson would be perfect. Much like D'Amico Ryans in Houston, Johnson is young at just 37 years old. So he would relate well with this relatively young squad as well as Bryce Young. Another key, which is something that Johnson may have to learn, is that we need to have a guy that's willing to stand up to David Tepper, okay? Like, if Ben Johnson does not agree, if he's hired by the Panthers and he doesn't agree with Tepper on something, he needs to make it extremely clear. Like, hey, man, I don't think this is the move. I mean, he needs to express it. I don't know how vocal of a guy Ben Johnson actually is, but we need someone strong-willed who's willing to stand up to that because we are in a dire situation. The ideal situation overall is to have Ben Johnson named head coach. He brings in his own offensive coordinator. Then we're able to retain Ejiro Evero as defensive coordinator. Chris Tabor could stay on as special teams coordinator. He's done a fine job at that. And then maybe even if we wanted to push it, have senior assistant Jim Caldwell stay. And then let Johnson fill out the rest of the staff of his own. I know Evero is going to be a wanted coordinator, if not a head coach this offseason, so we may not be able to retain him, but if we are, that would be huge for this franchise. It would be such a win. I mean, he's a great coordinator. He did so good with this Panthers defense. I would love to have him back. And honestly, take that staff and put it alongside a competent GM that isn't a Tepper yes boy, and see how quickly this team can be turned around. Hope is not completely lost. Carolina Panthers fans, do not be completely discouraged. I truly believe Ben Johnson is the guy that can save the Carolina Panthers, that can be the long-term head coach for the future. And I hope David Tepper does everything possible. He does whatever it takes. Put his pride aside, get the best guy available, and bring Ben Johnson to Charlotte.